I think the Nothing Phone 3 could be a very enticing option over the Pixel 9 Pro and 9 Pro XL, at least until the 10 series launches in just over a month's time. Is it though? Well, let's help answer that question with a little bit of a comparison of this duo. Stick around though by hitting the subscribe button, it really helps me out, it helps you out hopefully, and we'll all help each other in the process. I call that a little bit of a win-win. Cheers. So I think sometimes people can be critical of brands for sticking to boring or plain designs, but then we're also critical if a brand tries something a little bit more, let's say unorthodox. And I have to give Nothing some credit for at least doubling down on unique standout design traits with their hardware. I think the clear finish combined with the almost random placement of the cameras is unlike anything else out there, unlike anything out there that we've seen before. I think some will love it, many will hate it, but that's okay. The discourse is almost like free marketing for the device anyway, so Nothing probably doesn't care either way. Conversely, I have to say it's hard to deny that Google's Pixel 9 Pro XL is a remix of the iPhone with a camera bar slapped on top of it. I do think it's striking in its own way, but truthfully, it is also a little bit derivative in its own ways. It almost seems like it's been designed to have that one standout option that eventually blends into the background and just into a sea of other phones from other brands. I think one thing to note about the Glyph Matrix region, which is the core standout addition to the Phone 3, can get a little bit hot around this section when downloading lots of applications during the initial device setup. The capacitive touch button that sort of blends into the design also means that cases are going to require a silly cutout section if you do use this button. The company can try and say it's not a gimmick, but there really isn't all that much utility beyond some, I'd call them distracting, flashy, Tamagotchi-esque mini-games. It's a risky addition, at least from the hardware perspective. I do think the old Glyph lights at least worked as an added camera soft lighting option, so yeah, it's sad to see them go, but Nothing has decided that they're going to utilize this and utilize a lot of other high-end materials with their hardware. The fit and finish, they're excellent. However, I will say the display is the first noticeable area of divergence between this duo. The LTPO OLED that is used in the Pixel 9 Pro and 9 Pro XL is a notable improvement over the Nothing Phone 3's screen. It has a 6.8-inch display, while the Nothing handset has a 6.67-inch panel, something a little bit more common in the industry. If you didn't already know, at least initially, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that there was a major difference in quality, although the Gorilla Glass 7i means lower scratch protection on the Phone 3 as well. You get a screen protector pre-applied in the box, so I don't think that scratch protection is much of a problem, but these screens are both good in their own way. That said, I would give the Pixel 9 Pro XL a little bit of an edge. It gets a tad bit brighter in real-world scenarios, and the colours pop a little bit more as well. For biometrics though, Google went with an ultrasonic scanner and used a more usual lower middle display position for that. I think that makes it just a little bit easier to grip your phone and unlock it, especially if you have a case on it. The Nothing Phone 3 has an optical scanner, but a very precarious bottom display edge position. I'm not a fan of this, and I think for a big fan it can require a little extra grip to get the device in your hands steadily to ensure it doesn't flop out your palm if you do press too heavily on the screen. The Pixel 9 Pro does have more reliable unlocking, but the speed from lock to unlock is pretty comparable across these, so yeah, if you care about unlock speed, you're going to be happy either way. Some of the other intangibles of the hardware differences include the volume buttons being on different sides. There's a slightly different power button placement, it's a little bit higher on the Nothing Phone, and the addition of an extra essential key on the right side. I keep confusing this for a power button, but it is effectively fairly similar across these. It just makes you feel right at home with either piece of hardware, given they're both kind of boxy devices as well. I don't think it necessarily needs to be reiterated how important updates are to the Google Pixel lineup. You're buying into what are the earliest updates and arguably the most frequent on the Android platform as well. Although still vastly different from AOSP, the clean experience is almost the yardstick by which we measure other versions of our favorite operating system. Nothing OS is effectively the next best thing as far as we can tell, but sadly the Phone 3 is not running the latest public OS version, while the Pixel 9 Pro XL is obviously the most up-to-date Android phone on the market. I've even been running the latest Android 16 QPR beta on the Pixel 9 Pro XL, which is a huge visual departure from previous versions. I'm really excited to test drive that when it is in its stable release. Despite that, the core experience is fairly similar across both of these phones. The Nothing OS 3.5 build, which is, as I say, based upon Android 15, is probably one of the most comparable to what you'll find on Pixel phones, but with Material 3 Expressive playing a more pivotal role moving forward with Pixel phones, I do think it's unclear what this means for Nothing OS 4.0. That update doesn't have a specific release date yet. Nothing OS already includes little visual tweaks and some extra functions that are really nice extra touches, so while it is a lightweight visual alteration, You do get some nice customization alongside some familiar design elements, including options for the lock screen, the home screen, even the quick settings panel, which has its own version of tiles that you can resize. Pixel phones obviously have a small suite of their own features, which are mostly limited to extra applications like Pixel Studio, Pixel Screenshots and Pixel Weather. Gemini is practically ubiquitous across all of Android, so we're not including that as an exclusive option. Nothing OS 3.5 on the Phone 3 though has a few unique tricks which I think are really nice, including that brand new or an upgraded Essential Space. This basically works in tandem with that Essential key on the side of the phone to capture your screen or send photos directly from that camera application. I'd liken it to an upgraded version of Pixel Screenshots with some added voice context if you want to add voice notes here. You can let the on-device AI contextualize the content or group into collections. It's an interesting take on the AI organization controls that we're actually starting to see a lot more on mobile, and I'm excited to see how this one develops over time. As for the performance, Nothing definitely wants us to believe that the Snapdragon 8S Gen 4 is a top-tier chip, but it's just a rung or a few steps below on the ladder in terms of that totem pole, as it were. It's a very capable processor, one that just about surpasses the Tensor G4 in day-to-day and especially high intensity in multi-core tasks. The only downside is that it does have a higher power draw, at least supposedly it has a higher power draw, for that approximate 20% or so gain in overall grunt. The Qualcomm chip and the faster onboard UFS 4.0 storage definitely keep the Phone 3 really snappy when in use, while I will say that the Pixel is smooth through a combination of software tuning and refined animations from Google. Objectively though, the Phone 3 will likely age a little better based upon the initial metrics and the hardware inside. Neither phone is racing up the performance charts though, and I do think they feel comparable when doing phone things, as it were, at least in my own testing. I think it would be remiss though to mention that the Phone 3 is definitely a millisecond or so faster when doing things like loading applications and opening files, so if you find that important, that might be the phone to go ahead and look at. There are another few things here, especially when we start to talk about battery and charging, that definitely give the Phone 3 a little bit of an edge over the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Firstly, there's that Qualcomm processor. It's actually more efficient than Tensor. Secondly, this device uses silicon carbon battery technology, something missing on Pixel phones. Thirdly, that cell itself is larger at 5,150 mAh. And finally, it has 65 watt charging via supported power brick. Over the lifespan of a modern phone, I do think the newer battery tech will be beneficial, as it does handle heat better than lithium-ion cells, which the Pixel series currently uses. It's a resounding whitewash and a night and day difference when we start to look at the overall day-to-day longevity. It's practically the biggest sore point for me of any Tensor-powered Google Pixel, and I don't think that's changed here. One of the few areas though that the Pixel surpasses a Nokia phone is actually and oddly in the wireless charging speed available to you. It has 23 watt wireless charging and 12 watt reverse wireless charging baked in, while the Phone 3 has 15 watt wireless charging and 7.5 watt reverse wireless charging. Sadly, there's no Qi charging, so there's no magnetic capabilities on either of these phones, but we are expecting that with the Pixel 10 series in the coming months. One thing I think is also quite weird is that despite the very different layouts and the confusing layouts, the Pixel and Nothing devices do have similar core camera systems. To keep things simple, Nothing has gone with 50 megapixel sensors across the front and back, so that's every single device, triple setup with 50 megapixel cameras on the rear and a selfie camera at 50 megapixels on the front. On the Pixel 9 Pro XL, the system does have a 50 megapixel main sensor, a 48 megapixel ultra-wide and 50 megapixel telephoto. The selfie camera is rated at slightly lower 42 megapixels. There is though quite a distinct difference in camera quality between this duo in my initial testing. The Phone 3 is fine, but I do think colours can be a little bit more muted across those three lenses. Images also lack the depth that you'll find on the Pixel, but overall I will say this cheaper phone holds up quite well. It's not one of the best cameras, but I don't think it really outright claims to be, and it does have a lot of extras that you can play around with to tune your photos as you see fit, basically. I'd say the Pixel has a more natural look, while the Nothing handset definitely produces images that feel a little bit more artificial in some ways. Zoom quality is quite different. The Pixel 9 Pro has a 5x optical zoom up to 30 times, while the Nothing Phone 3 has a 3x optical telephoto. That is AI enhanced up to 60x zoom. I've been suitably impressed with the Phone 3 so far. I think it's a capable setup that will produce great photos at all of its focal lengths. OAS though doesn't appear to be available when using that macro mode, which is something they're touting in their marketing, which does mean you need a steady hands to get up close high quality photos with lots of extra detail in that macro mode. Sadly though, it does lack a few video modes, most notably 8K video recording. The Pixel 9 Pro does this with the help of Video Boost, and I do think when you do use Video Boost, it has the best video on Android. Lots of this is naturally going to be subjective, but I do think there are clear visual markers and differences between what both camera systems are going to be capable of. I think in a blind test, most of you will go ahead and pick the Pixel, but yeah, very impressed with the Phone 3 so far. So if you're wondering, I do think the Venn diagram of Pixel fans and old OnePlus fans probably puts Nothing as a company slap bang in the middle, and that is both a positive and negative for this admittedly small Android brand. The first few iterations of Nothing devices I do think were that decent mid-range market fodder, but we anticipated a fully fledged top-tier phone worthy of that flagship moniker to arrive at sooner rather than later. I will say I'm not quite sure the Phone 3 hits all the main bases to be considered a true flagship within the wider industry, but it's a very close approximation of, well, a Pixel without being a Pixel, if that makes sense. It's eerily like the OnePlus we saw under Carl Pei's previous tutelage. There's a little bit of a downgrade over a true flagship phone in practically every area, but not enough to diminish the experience all that drastically. I do think Google's done something similar with the Pixel series when you start to look at it at a macro level, but they've stat padded in other areas to account for downgrades in specific areas. The Nothing Phone 3 has a few more evenly spread downgrades, or at least that's how I'd describe it. I do think it's a marginally overpriced phone though, possibly around $50 to $100. For a company that is barely half a decade old, it is hard though not to be a little impressed. Without being disrespectful, I'd probably say that the Nothing Phone 3 feels like a Poco phone aimed at Pixel fans, in that you get a little bit of everything expected from the big hitters, marginally cheaper, not massively cheaper, but with a few caveats thrown in. I do think it really is a great alternative to the Pixel 9 Pro, especially considering this is a newer phone and therefore has a slightly longer shelf life as a result. I know fans haven't been receptive to the new design and the design changes, but let me know what you think down in the comment sections below. More phones competing at this price bracket is a good thing, I think, no matter what you do or what side of the fence you fall on. Cheers for watching though, hopefully you've enjoyed this comparison, and yeah, I'll speak to you later.